speakers for this morning. The first is Rivka Elitzur. She's writing her PhD at Tel Aviv University. Her focus, she kicked off as an archaeologist, so you should know where she's coming from. And we appreciate archaeologists in this crowd. Her focus is on Jewish Aramaic amulets from late antique Palestine. In her thesis, she publishes for the first time a group of, to this point, unknown Jewish amulets and discusses this group of text from a material, cultural point of view. The second speaker will be Dr. Avigail Manekin-Bamberger, who's a postdoctoral fellow and a member of the Martin Buber Society of Fellows at the Hebrew University. Her research focuses on the social and cultural history of Jews in antiquity, with a special emphasis on Jewish society in the Sasanian Empire. Her first book, currently under review, Inshallah, put into question the scholarly dichotomy between ancient Jewish law and magic by arguing that legal formulations constituted an essential part of the Jewish magical texts, and Jewish legal terms were often invested in the metaphysical, with metaphysical meaning, and there's basically an overlap between the two spheres. And she's going to unpack this in her talk today. So we're looking forward to both your talks. We're moving the mic, and
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. Can I have the PowerPoint? Okay, I'll start. Throughout the ages and among different cultures, people were fascinated and at the same time deeply threatened by the possibility of manipulating the natural course of the world through supernatural magical ways. In many cases, magic was considered dangerous and vicious, at times even leading to aggressive acts against its practitioners. Or will it work?
It's making noises, so it's probably something right.
So at times even leading to aggressive acts against its practitioners, or at least people who are suspected to be witches, things like that. There is a tendency to differentiate between black magic, or more accurately aggressive magic, meaning spells. Okay, that's just a photo of burning witches. There is a tendency to differentiate between black magic, or more accurately aggressive magic, meaning spells and procedures that were meant to hurt, to injure, to kill, to separate lovers, or to force one to another's will. And white magic, the more legitimate supernatural way of achieving health, protection, wealth, or success. However, this distinction is misleading because violence is in fact a part of most magical acts. For example, protective magic used to ward off demons usually contains some sort of form of binding, locking, banishing, expelling, and so on. Moreover, as Yuval Harari, who is not here today, convincingly demonstrated, the most basic procedure of Jewish magic is the adjuration, ha'ashba'ah. This, in fact, is an aggressive act in which magicians force another being to act by reciting holy names. Here is an example from an incantation ball from the Schoen collection, published by Shaked, For, and Bhairo. Avigail will later talk more about incantation balls, but I'll just read briefly the text. I adjure, this is the higher text. I adjure and again I beswear you, evil spirit, that you should not go and not become to Miharnahid, daughter of Achat, ... For if you go and persecute the body, head, temple, ear, etc. Of this woman, you, evil spirit, they will ban you and break you and excommunicate you, etc. So in this example, the adjuration is addressed against the evil spirit that troubles Miharnahid, daughter of Achat. The idiomatic phrase ashbait alaich is accompanied by an unambiguous threat that if the spirit breaks the oath, they will ban you and break you and excommunicate you. This threat exposes the violent element in the adjuration. It is an act of force where a magician or a Baal Shem compels the evil spirits to act according to his own will, in this case, to move away from the body of a certain Mihar Nahid. While using violence against demons is relatively understandable, at times adjurations are used to force benevolent beings such as angels. Like in the second example that you can see in the PowerPoint, Mashba'ana lechon malachin kadishin tavin umehimanin. Although there are not explicit threats in this text, the magician forces the angels to do his will, and this is basically a violent act. Now, aggressive magic meant to hurt people was a common practice in ancient society and is apparent in Jewish magic as well. However, archaeological remains from late antique Palestine suggest that it was not widely used. While more than 100 Jewish inscribed apotropaic metal amulets from this period were found in the land of Israel, and this is basically the topic of my PhD, only 2 items can be attached by certainty to aggressive magical activity. This is a photo of them. One of them, the right one, is a bronze leaf found under the threshold of the ancient synagogue in Merot, in Upper Galilee. It was inscribed with an Aramaic spell to subdue the local townspeople to a certain Yosef, son of Zenubia. The other one, the one on the left, found in the area of the Nirim synagogue in the Negev, is a piece of clay engraved with a love charm. The sherd was found crushed with traces of fire, the result of a magical procedure that accompanied the preparation of the inscription. Today I will focus on another case of archaeological record for aggressive Jewish magic by presenting a new discovery. A Jewish lead curse tablet designed for a chariot race dating from the 5th or the 6th century CE, found on the site of the ancient city of Antioch. Today it is in Antakya in Turkey. This is a small, not very sexy object, but is rather unique in different ways, which makes it an excellent object for the study of the aggressive Jewish magic, and moreover of the Jewish community in ancient Antioch and its relationship with the local society. I will start with some background, and this is the This is the slide that I wanted to show you. Chariot races. So chariot races were one of the most popular types of sports during the Roman and Byzantine periods. In almost every major city, one could find a hippodrome or a circus where exciting competitions took place. The audience was divided into 4 factions: the reds, the greens, the whites, and the blues, as you can see here. And toward the 5th and the 6th centuries, the reds and the whites almost disappeared, and the greens and the blues became the 2 predominant factions. To appreciate the deep emotional involvement and loyalty of the partisans to their factions, think of fans of modern areas of sports such as football or basketball, which is a similar phenomenon in many ways. This is just to illustrate. Yeah. A common technique to impact the outcome of a contest was to write magic curse texts against, and this is only one example, against the opposing group's charioteers and horses. The curse, etched on a small piece of lead, would usually refer to the names of the charioteers, their horses, and their color, wishing them a horrible end. When ready, the tablet was generally folded and then hidden under the arena or at a nearby well or grave. To date, many dozens of circus curse texts have come to light, such as these, nearly all of them written in Greek or in Latin. These circus lead curses were part of a broader phenomenon of Greek and Latin lead curses designed for a variety of aggressive purposes in all sorts of contexts, which scholars refer to as deficciones, and Avigail will soon talk about some examples of different kinds of deficciones. Did Jews engage in the magic practice at the game at the hippodrome? Had they been obedient rabbinic Jews, the answer would definitely be no. The Talmud repeatedly forbids Jews to visit hippodromes, and the term Yoshvei Tetraot veKirkesaot, those who sit in theaters and circuses, at some point came to denote the inverse of those who study at Bet HaMidrash, the place of Torah study. Given that environment, it is hard to imagine that Jews could have become so involved in the games as to engage in the risky, illegal practice of creating and hiding magic curse tablets at the arena. However, outside of the walls of Bet HaMidrash, things were rather less straightforward. There are many indications suggesting that Jews were among those who cheered at the hippodrome. With regard to Antioch in particular, Bishop John Chrysostom, in a polemical anti-Jewish treatise, describes the Jews in the 4th century as people who know nothing better than, and I quote, to be injured and wounded while fighting for their favorite charioteers. John Malalas, the 6th century CE Antiochian chronicler, reports on 2 events in the history of Antioch in which Jews were attacked by the Green faction supporters during the course of riots between the Greens and the Blues. Hence, we shouldn't be particularly surprised to find at least 2 literary sources that deal with Jewish magic which refer to the specific magic practice of preparing and concealing curse tablets in order to win the race. The first is found in Sefer HaRazim, the Book of Mysteries, a magic treatise written in Hebrew by a Jew sometime during late antiquity, probably in Palestine. Laid out as a manual for the Jewish sorcerer, the Book of Mysteries contains an assortment of magic procedures for different occasions and objectives, each introduced with the phrase "Im bikashta," should you wish. One of them runs as follow, and I brought you the translation, but maybe we will read the Hebrew. This is from the Cairo Geniza, of course. אם ביקשת להריץ סוסים בלא כוחם ולא ייכשלו במרוצתם ויהיו קלים כרוח ולא תקדמם רגל כל חיה ויישאו חן בחסד במרוצתם, כך טס של כסף, טס is the it is translated as lamella. It's a very thin plaque of metal, so here it's a silver lamella, וכתוב עליו שמות הסוסים ושמות המלאכים ושם השר שעליהם, ואמור משביע אני עליכם מלאכי מרוצה הרצים בין הכוכבים, שתעזרו כוח וחיל את הסוסים של מרוץ פלוני, ואת הניוחוס שלו, הניוחוס is the Greek word for charioteer, and it's in the Hebrew text, המריץ אותו, וירוצו ולא יעפו ולא ייכשלו ויהיו רצים וקלים כרוח וכל חיה לא יעמדו על לפניהם וכל קסם וכישוף, וקח את הטס ותומנהו במרוץ שאתה מבקש לזכות. This is a pure Jewish example written, as you can see in Hebrew, of a recipe for making a curse tablet to win a race and to hide it at the circus. The main difference between this object and the actual circus tablets found in archaeological excavations, like I showed you before, is that here the metal plaque is made of silver, while those used in reality were almost always made of lead. And the lead was considered as an aggressive metal in magic. The second source, here, is a magic book titled Charba de Moshe. This book was published by Professor Yuval Harari, The Sword of Moses. This Jewish book of magic was written a little later, probably in early medieval period, but it contains some earlier sections, among which is the following magic recipe for winning a race. And the following translation is mine because it wasn't included in Yuval's edition. So I'll read the translation. And if you wish to race horses well, ride the sword. The sword is the magic name sequence that can be used in all kinds of magical processes. So write the sword, these magic words, on a sheet of papyrus and pour wine into a new clay vessel, and they shall drink, they is probably the charioteers, and wash their faces, and they will win. This positive procedure designed to gain victory for the charioteers is followed by an aggressive charm intended to ruin the opponents at the race. If you wish to ruin him, write the sword on a copper lamella and bury it in the field, and they will be devastated. I've marked the word field. The Hebrew text says kamaton, as you can see, a word which is not documented elsewhere in either Aramaic or Hebrew sources. Scholars have suggested correcting this word to the word kampon, derived from Latin campus, and known from rabbinic literature as field, a field, and which sometimes denotes a circus or other type of Roman building that housed public spectacles. I shall return to this suggestion later on. Interestingly, while many non-Jewish circus curse tablets have been found, not a single recipe written in Greek for preparing a circus curse tablet has survived. On the other hand, not up until the discovery that I'm about to share with you today, has a single actual Jewish lead curse tablet of any kind been recorded. So now let's move
Who
to
needs
the...
to drink it? The horses or the...
I think that the men, the charioteers. So this is the tablet. This lead tablet was discovered under the hippodrome of the renowned ancient city of Antioch on the Orontes in 1934 by the Princeton University expedition to the site. It was excavated at the meta of the hippodrome. That is, this is the illustration of the hippodrome in Antioch, and the meta is the turning point of the race. You can see that it's like a very huge scene, and here the horses and the charioteers should turn. This part of the hippodrome was considered the riskiest spot for the racing charioteers and horses, and hence it was a perfect place for magicians to conceal their curses. The tablet was found rolled and pinned by an iron nail, like you can see here. This is the photo of the rolled tablet, and this is after opening, and here is the nail. A practice that was probably intended to enhance the potency of the curse. Again, lead and then iron nail, all are considered aggressive ingredients. The iron nail was one of the reasons that the tablet was only lately unrolled, since it served the Princeton Museum of Art as a fine example of a nailed defixio. Only after the curators unrolled the tablet did it turn out that they were examining the only example of a Jewish Aramaic lead defixio, and more specifically, the first Jewish Aramaic circus curse. This is the illustration I made. I am currently working on a publication that presents this tablet together with Dr. Margareta Former from the University of Leiden. The tablet measures about 9 by 4 inches. It contains text and illustrations that were superficially etched onto the lead. I gave you in your handouts, you can see the text and the English preliminary translation, and even the illustration if you are interested. And so it contains text and illustrations that were superficially etched onto the lead, which makes it almost impossible to read with the naked eye. It was only by using the recent technology of RTI, if anybody knows, reflectance transformation imaging, that we were able to decipher most of the inscription. The script is mainly cursive and quite sloppily written. In a few instances, as you can see in the illustration, the scribe wrote over existing lines, and in one instance, this is a clear palimpsest. The scribe started writing, then deleted the line and wrote over it. On the upper part of the tablet, the text is arranged along 3 illustrations of frontal human faces. They appear to represent the cursed charioteers. The iron nail that damaged mainly this part of the tablet was most probably meant to stab these faces. The Aramaic circus tablet from Antioch must have been written by a Jewish magician, but it was found in what one would assume was a totally non-Jewish context. I'm curious to examine the meeting points of these 2 different environments and to investigate how the Jewish magician who wrote this tablet balanced his Jewish magic set of tools with other instruments at his disposal to achieve the desired result. So this is the text. On the one hand, the text contains professional jargon derived from the vivid atmosphere of the hippodrome. Let's take, for example, the word venet, and you can find it in the text, for instance, in line in column C, you can see columns, and in column A, and in line 18, venita, it's meyuda. Venet is the Aramaic rendering for the Latin/Greek term venetoi, the blue faction. As circus curse tablets are in most cases aggressively worded against one's opponent, we may assume that this was a curse text written by an anti-blues to make the blue faction lose a certain race. However, when examining the text alone, the word venet is never clearly linked to an explicitly aggressive formula, which may suggest that the curse was actually written for the blue faction. This assumption would correspond with the Jewish recipe from the Book of Mysteries, to which I referred earlier, where the magic procedure is meant to positively raise horses when they are exhausted, and not, as in the recipe from the Sword of Moses, to ruin opponents at the race. The possibility that the curse was written by a Jewish partisan of the blues would also fit the common scholarly convention regarding the blue Jews in the early Byzantine Empire, especially in Antioch. This convention is based primarily on the chronicles of John Malalas, who, as I mentioned earlier, reported 2 different occasions on which supporters of the Green faction killed Jews, since the latter were considered supporters of the blues. Several city inscriptions from Miletos and Aphrodisias that identify the Jews as blues reinforce this theory, and this is just one nice inscription. However, as Alan Cameron shows, one must be wary about identifying circus factions with religious groups. As we shall see, there is a textual evidence to support the hypothesis that this curse text was written against the blue faction, and I will come back to it later. Even more striking is the word kamata that you can find
Next line.
in the next line. What's the next line?
Nun something.
Right? Which line is it?
Column C.
Column C, right. Column C, and again
In line 16.
in line 16, יפה מאוד. Okay, thank you. So this word, we know the verb kamat, right, like in modern Hebrew, and it is used in Aramaic in the sense of a wrinkle or a tie, and this might be an Aramaic designation for a curse tablet, alluding both to its material qualities, a rolled or folded or bound charm, and to its magical character, a spell to bind horses. This theory might find further support in the etymology of the common noun kamea, amulet, believed to derive from the verb to bind, kama, kuf mem ayin. However, kamata is, as a lamela, is not documented elsewhere, whereas a variety of other options for this word can be found both in rabbinic and in magical literature. Let us then turn to other possibilities. The Greek word kampter or kamptos denotes the turning post at the circus, the point where the charioteers had to turn their horses at high speed, which has obviously the most difficult part of the race to negotiate. Some Greek curse texts mention this term explicitly. For example, in a curse text from Carthage, the charioteers are cursed to, and I quote the translation, fall dragged along and over the hippodrome, especially at the turning points. I suggest that kamata is an Aramaic transliteration of kamptos, with the pe omitted, which often occurs in cases of consonant clusters. Furthermore, this interpretation points to one of the rare cases where text and archaeology reinforce each other. As I previously mentioned, the current tablet was excavated at the Meta, the actual turning post of the Hippodrome of Antioch. And if we now return to the source that we began with, I think I have a, how do I?
אחורה או קדימה?
פליי, כן. לא משנה?
תלחצי על זה אולי.
כן, כן. את רוצה להפעיל?
כן.
תלחצי על המשולש, או על זה.
אבל אין, כאילו אני לא רואה אותך בה.
תסתכלי על
איפה שיש
המסך
משולש?
ואז תעשי.
אוקיי, זה סתם גימיק, אבל נחמד, מבן חור. כן, that's the turning point. Okay, and if we go back now to the source that we talked about before, the magic recipe from the sword of Moses, we come across the same verb, kamat, in the word kamaton. I contend that the correction suggested by scholar Kampon is unnecessary. In the view of this newly discovered word kamata in our tablet, the sword recipe turns out to preserve a specific technical term from the circus, and the magic process becomes far clearer. If one wishes to ruin one's enemies in the circus, make a metal curse tablet and bury it at a strategic turning post in the hippodrome. On the other hand, the general format of our current circus text corresponds with what we normally find in Jewish magical texts. The Aramaic adjuration by the names of the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, and the name of the Jewish God regularly appear in these texts. Line 17 in your handouts provides an unusual historiola, a legend used for magical purposes. And I quote, At Malacha dekam kodam atane de Bilam. Yeah? Can you see it here? You, the angel who stood in front of the donkey of Biliam. This refers to the biblical story told in the book of Numbers 22 about Bilam, son of Beor, the Gentile prophet and magician, who was hired by Balak, king of Moab, to curse Israel. The story tells us about the angel of God who was revealed only to Bilam's donkey, which immediately stopped its tracks. Our magician commands the same angel from the story of Bilam's donkey to rise up before someone else, whose name is of course missing from the text, but we may assume that the target of this adjuration was the horses of the opposing faction. The magician sought to replay at the circus the same miraculous event that stopped Bilam's donkey. This shows creative use of the biblical content for a very practical objective, and it demonstrates that the author of this text was well acquainted with the biblical text. Our Jewish magician carefully chose unique Jewish ingredients and applied them to the world of chariot races. Finally, and to complicate things just a little more, and this is a suggestion, so I would like to hear your thoughts about it later, maybe in the discussion. There is an intriguing term mentioned twice in the text. This is the word chalkedi or chalkedaya. Alen shmahata de alin or ilain susvata de vanita chalkedaya. Lines. Can you find it? Yeah.
11.
Line in 11. Chalkedaya. Right? While we fail to trace this word in Jewish Aramaic dictionaries, We did find it in later Syriac sources where the word Chalkad, Chaf Lamed Kuf Dalet, refers to the Chalcedonians, the Christian movement that followed the decisions of the Council of Chalcedon in 451. In the centuries following this ecumenical council, the Christians of Antioch were deeply divided between the adherents of the council's decisions and those who rejected it. It is therefore probable, in my opinion, that the word Chalkedaya in our text refers to this Christian group. If so, we must explain how this term found its way into a Jewish magical text for a chariot race. Since it is highly unlikely that Jews were involved in Christian religious controversies, the best way to understand the Chalcedonians in this context is to assume that it was somehow connected to the social environment of the circus. In a world where the politically correct was not yet in vogue, and given the passionate atmosphere of the hippodrome, social and religious groups were sometimes used as pejoratives. Pejoratives. Thus, for example, Theophanes the Confessor, a 9th century chronicler, describes earlier events at which the Green faction supporters were called Jews, Manichaeans, and Samaritans. In this vein, I understand the phrase Chalcedonian blues in the current context to be an offensive declaration meant to slander the supporters of the blue faction, against whom, so it seems, the cursed tablet was written. To conclude, the Antioch tablet, though not very impressive in look, is a significant discovery, not only because it is the first Jewish defixio. It is also unique in being a Jewish magical text that can be read in its contemporary context, employing precious archaeological information on the one hand and historical sources on the other. A final question: who wrote this text and under which circumstances? We learn from the text that he was probably anti-blue, that he called the blues Chalcedonians, apparently because he despised both the blues and the followers of the Council of Chalcedon. He was a professional magician who not only used various magical tools to achieve his goals, lead tablet, illustrations, aggressive text, iron nail, but was familiar with the technical terminology of the circus. He knew that a turning post was a perfect spot to hide the tablet, mentioned it in the text, and then managed to execute his plan. And we know that he was a Jew who wrote a Jewish Aramaic curse text replete with Jewish angels and biblical figures. His text does not appear to be a translation of a Greek source. Rather, it seems to stem from a Jewish tradition that was adapted to create this unique circus text. From this point, we can only speculate what lay beneath the creation of this artifact. Did the scribe make the curse for his own use or for his friends, the anti-blue Jewish inhabitants of Antioch? Or, as in the case of the biblical Bilam, was he hired by some non-Jewish locals, perhaps for his special exotic skills, to curse the blue faction? The Jewish circus text from Antioch offers no answer to these questions. Nonetheless, it sheds rare light on meeting points between cultures, traditions, religious beliefs, and circus factions, the stories of the ordinary people in a powerful empire. Thank you. Okay.
אנחנו בעד בנט.
לא, אני מתפקר. לא מביטים.
Is it working? Okay.
שנה איזה סמל יש לך על האוטו במרות. אם זה סוס, אם זה כוכב. כמה כוחות?
Okay, so I also want to thank you for the invitation, and it is a great pleasure to be here and also to present with Rivka, and something that never happened before, so we're especially excited. So I'm going to speak today a little bit about using religious institutions in order to make magical acts or curses, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. But I first want a general introduction. As Effie told you, I wrote my dissertation on intersections between law and magic in ancient Jewish texts, and on a personal level, I started my studies in Talmud, and my BA and MA in the Talmud department at Hebrew University, like Michal, and at a certain point during my master's, I heard that not in the university of course, that there was this huge corpus of incantation bowls from the time of the Talmud, and I was shocked. I didn't understand how being in the Talmud department, and it's a department that I'm sure you know has a slight they like philology. How could it be that? You know, this is taped, so I'm using my words carefully. So I didn't understand how this huge corpus of texts I never knew about, and then I said, okay, I'm going to write a master's about all of the parallels between the bowls and the Talmud, and of course I only scratched the surface. But one of the things that came across from the beginning was that these magic bowls are replete with legal formulae. With, for example, one of the most common methods of banishing demons is using the divorce and using technical legal formulae. So I was very interested in these intersections between law and magic, because usually law is perceived as some sort of, a product of the elite, whereas magic is usually seen as something popular. And I saw that actually there's a lot in common, and more than that, and this is what I'm going to demonstrate today. When we understand legal formulae within the magic texts, we could then go back to read the legal texts, and a lot of times we have new understandings, because as in any language, also today, every word that we say, there's a cultural context, and if we go to a different country and hear a word, we might be missing something. And of course, when we're talking about a culture of 1,500 years ago, we are reading the language and we have a feeling that we understand it because it's very similar to our language, but actually we are missing, the cultural context. So magic, the many magic sources can help us in achieving a closer or a better understanding of various legal terminologies, and today I'm going to specifically speak about dedications. So I want to start with non-Jewish magic. And here I'm going to connect with what Rivka explained about the lead amulets, or the curse text. Here's an example of a curse text that is written on, that is inscribed on lead. And within this, with very large finding of curse texts, which are called deficciones, we have a subgenre of something that was named by Henk Versenel as prayers for justice or judicial prayers. And these texts, on the one hand, they're written on lead or inscribed, but on the other hand, they are not written in the normal cursing way. Rather, they are written as dedications. So I'll show you an example from a curse text, and this is on your handout, number 1. And this curse text, we'll start by reading, and then I'll explain a bit more. Artemis dedicates to Demeter and Kore and the gods with Demeter, all of them, the person who did not return the garments that I had left behind, although I asked them back. May he, in his own person, bring them up to Demeter. Also, if it is another person who has my possessions, burning with fever, publicly confessing his deed, let it be permissible for me to drink and eat together and come under the same roof as the cursed person, for I am wronged. So in this curse text, Artemis, her clothes were stolen, and as we know, it's not like modern day that if your clothes are stolen for some reason, you have other clothes, but this is really important for her. So her way of dealing with this misfortune was to inscribe or have someone inscribe for her a dedication, and the dedication is of the person that stole the garments, and this sort of dedication is supposed to bring the outcome of getting getting the clothes back, or at least having a punishment. Now this is one curse text from Knidos, but this in the temple of Demeter, and there are actually 13 texts found there that are all very similar, where there's a dedication of either the wrongdoer or the stolen possessions. It's very interesting that all 13 are written for women. The clients are women, and this is a temple for a goddess, so it may make sense. But I want you to remember the use of the dedication. And
sorry, can you explain what dedicates to the god?
It dedicates. To give to the god. It's like a sacrifice.
No, but does it mean that she basically is relinquishing her ownership over the clothes?
Well, in this specific specific text, she is actually dedicating the person, not the garments. There are other texts where you dedicate, I didn't bring them, that the dedication is of the stolen coins, but here it's the person.
What does it mean to dedicate?
Possess,
Yeah, so what does it mean?
It means so
they can do him.
It's how I understand it, and this will be clearer after we read more text, is that this person is now consecrated, meaning he or she is in possession of the gods, and now the gods could do whatever they want with them, which of course should be making them sick and torturing them. But that's the use of the consecration or the dedication. But it's really like a sacrifice, and we'll see it in a similar and maybe different way in the Aramaic text. So the next text.
What's the second part of this?
Okay, then the second part I'm also going to get to it because it's very similar, I think, to what will happen in the Jewish text, and I think it has to do with what the vow actually is. The verse now, the person who published this text thought that the fear of being together with this person is because of the fear of contagion, he's a cursed person, so you don't want to be. I have a different view, but I'll get to that soon. I think I'm going to skip the second curse text, just so we'll have more time for the rest, but it's also the word anathema, which now is used as curse. The etymology and the initial meaning is also a dedication, something of the gods. So anathema is used even without reading this whole thing. The anathema is used. It was originally used as a dedication, but it also became a meaning of a curse, and we could see that also in the New Testament, in the Bible. Okay, so I want to move on to the two Jewish texts, and I'm going to start with Aramaic incantation bowl. Now, a word about the finding. So I started off with this, but just a little more details. Incantation bowls are are, as I said, a large corpus of texts written on bowls, amuletic texts, from around the 5th to 7th century, and they usually are used for protection, as we will see soon. But there are also some that are used to curse, or a more religious way of putting it, or a more is not to curse but to send back curses, and for other reasons. But usually they're protective. And these bowls, a scribe wrote on the bowl, and later it was buried face down. And already in the beginning of the 20th century, there were archaeological excavations in Nippur, modern-day Iraq, and some 100 of bowls were found. And now, I mean, since till the year 2000, a couple other 100 bowls were published. And since 2000, with the war in Iraq, there has been a flood of new material that we know of, and this, of course, has to do with ethical questions that I won't go into right now. But the fact is that there are now around 2,000 incantation bowls, written mostly in Jewish Aramaic, but also in Mandaic and Syriac, and about 600 were published. Okay, so I want to read. I'll read from. From the translation also in your handout in number 3. This mystery, Raza, is designated for healing Miaroi, son of Gushnai, Piraduch, daughter of Dadai, his wife, Bar Shabbatei, Ima and Malbonai and Gushnai, the children of Piraduch. May they be healed by the mercy of heaven, and may they be sealed from all evil destroyers, from demons, from plague spirits, from devs, which is a kind of, that's demon in Middle Persian, from afflictions, from misfortunes, from Satans, from evil Liliths, both male and female, from all evil sorceries and evil magic acts, from curses and vows and accidents and spells and afflictions, and from all evil and mighty destroyers. Amen, amen, Selah, amen, amen, Selah, hallelujah. Yeah, so this is a very common so this is a very we find very similar texts that are protection from a very wide variety of misfortunes and demons that can be caused to a person. Now, what was interesting for me when I saw these texts is that a lot of times you could see that there are various lists, but they are made out of usually pairs or common pairs that come together. For example, min shidei v'shivtei, okay, from demons and a certain probably kind of demon. And one of the things that stood out for me is that loteta, a curse, and nidra, vow, most often they appear together, the curse and the vow. And when you look at the dictionary of Sokolov, the Jewish Aramaic Babylonian dictionary, Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, when you look at these different words and from the lists and the incantation bowls, he'll have nidra and he'll translate vow, but then he'll have another translation, a type of demon. Meaning, if it's in a bowl, Sokolov thinks that this is a type of demon. And he has this translation for about 50 different items. And it's a sort of position that's saying, if it's in a magic text, then it probably has to do with demons. But I think that when the person wrote vow, he meant to write vow. And that it is not a coincidence that he kept writing it, or different scribes kept writing it together with the curse. So if we read another incantation bowl, this will be even clearer. So I'm reading, this amulet that has been made for Imi, daughter of Kakai, so that vows, curses, and evil speeches will not come near them. I adjure you, vow, curse, and evil speech that are with Emi, daughter of Kakai, be it by a roar that roars over its descendants, be it by a slumber that goes out from a mouth, be it from a vow of a Gentile or a Jew, be it from a curse of far or close, be it from a curse of a neighbor or brother and sister, be it by a curse of a man or a woman, be it by a vow fulfilled to male idols and female idols, be it by a vow and fulfillment of all humans. So again, here's a list that is more about vows and curses. If you could see, there's a table on your handout, and to make it interesting, on your handout it's in Aramaic, and on the screen it's in English. And you can see that there's another bowl that has very similar formulae. We read M123, and this is M138, and there is a certain the scribe, when he writes the different formulae, he switches between the word for vow, nidra, and between the word for curse. Like, be it from a vow of a far or close neighbor, and in the other bowl, be it from a curse of far or close neighbor. So it seems that for this scribe, and of course I have to mention this is the same scribe of two different bowls. So for this scribe, the vow is actually a type of curse. Now I want to explain a little bit more about.
Curse might be a kind of vow.
Yes, but I think that the vow is a type of curse, and I'll explain why. Now, there is something that comes only with the vow, or this is, almost only with the vow, and that's what you have in your handout. Uven nidra de meshalem lepatkarei, about a vow who is being fulfilled, and there's also certain kinds of vows that are being fulfilled. For example, this is on your handout, not on the presentation. A different bowl. May they release from Abba, son of Barkita, the curse, the vow, afflictions, etc., etc. And then sorceries of the cemetery, and sorceries of the house of idols, and sorceries of the synagogue, and vows of the cemetery, and vows of the house of idols, and vows of the synagogue. So I want to remind you what we read before. There is a type of vow, a type of dedication that can harm someone else. So we saw an example of someone who, in a house of idols, dedicated a culprit, dedicated the wrongdoer, and this is actually a dedication, is a sort of vow. You take something and you dedicate it to God or to the gods. So what I think is that these different vows are a sort of dedication to God, in order that God will, it depends, will punish or according to the wish of the person who went to this magician. Or now, this is important to stress, especially because of the subject of this group, that usually vows or dedications are understood as, a very pious thing. Someone, what could be more pious than taking your belongings and saying this is God's belongings? But this is only true if you are standing alone before God. Because if you have, a sheep and you wanted to give it to God, great, you're a pious person. But when there are other people in the house and you say all of these dedications, for example, your clothes and your animals and everything now is for God, then the people around you are affected by this. And this is something that when a man stands alone before God, this is actually pious. But when another person enters this equation, then it becomes a way to have power, and it is not a coincidence that, for example, in Jewish tradition, a male can release the vows of his wife or his daughter, because this is actually a form of hierarchy and use of power. Now, I already, even in my words, went back to the rabbinic literature, and I want to show this a little bit more, how we could understand biblical literature or rabbinic literature when understanding that the vow was actually in practice used commonly to curse or to harm. So one example is Mark, and there's a parallel in Matthew.
I thought we introduced Mark as rabbinic literature.
No, I said rabbinic and biblical literature.
I agree, by the way.
Okay. No, I didn't want to. So this is
Invoking very bad demons.
what?
You're invoking very bad demons.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read from the translation of a relatively well-known passage. Then he said to them, this is Jesus criticizing the Pharisees. Then he said to them, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother, and whoever speaks evil of a father or mother must surely die.'" But you say that if anyone tells father or mother, "Whatever support you may have from me is korban," korban, and there's transliteration of korban, and then saying that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on, and you do many things like this. So Jesus is criticizing the Pharisees for using the korban, the vow, and scholars have written about this, such as Albert Baumgarten, to show that korban is one of the ways that in rabbinic literature it is one of the substitute names of the vow. So there is some sort of method in someone telling their parents, "I'm sorry, you can't benefit from me because everything here is consecrated to God." Now, so scholars have mentioned that this is very similar to what we find in rabbinic literature in terms of how vows are used. But what I want us to notice is that this sort of use of the vow as a curse, and Jesus even uses the proof text of lo tekalel, is very it fits with how I presented the popular use of vows in later Jewish tradition and earlier Greek curse texts. So now I'm moving to rabbinic literature, and I think that everyone will agree that the Mishnah is part of the rabbinic corpus. Yes. So we have. Well, first of all, I brought Mishnah Ketubot, but also we have a whole tractate of Mishnah Nedarim, Masechet Nedarim, where we have different kinds of vows, and some are really ascetic vows between, for example, Nazir. This word skipped my mind. How do we say Nazir? Oh, come on. Okay, I feel comfortable now that I forgot the word. But Nidrei Nazirut.
There's no term in English, but Nazirite.
Okay, Nazirite, great, even better. Anyways, so there's all different kinds of vows that someone vows that he won't eat certain kinds of fruit, and he won't talk about talk with certain kind of people, etc. But there's a lot of description of what I call violent vows that a man utters before his wife. So here are some examples from Ketubot. Okay, and I'm reading from the translation. One who vows his wife from benefiting from him up to 30 days, he must appoint an administrator. More than that, he must divorce her and pay her ketubah. One who vows his wife from tasting one kind of fruit, from adorning herself with any particular type, from entering her father's house, from entering a house of mourning or a house of feasting, must divorce her and pay her ketubah because he is locking her. But if he claims a different reason, it is permitted. Now, without going into detail of these different things, I just want to highlight that vows are used as a violent means, domestic violence, when if you think about the relationship between this certain male and female, this man and wife, the man is denying her of very basic things, even to go to her family. And of course, if I was a psychologist, I would tell you that this is really domestic violence 101. But the way that he is doing that is using the vow, and this is an understanding that, again, that the vow was used in magical contexts, or if you could call it that, as a way to curse, gives us a key to reread the Mishnah of Nedarim. We should reread it. Not the scholars have argued, is vow a type of oath, and etc., etc., etc. But really, vows were just a common. One of the common uses of vows were methods of gaining power, methods of, you go into a place and you could start consecrating things, and you're seemingly engaged in pious religious activity, where in practice you are forming a hierarchy of where people can that people can be part of or not. So just to give one more type of a source that I don't have on the presentation, and that's the ossuaries and grave inscriptions. So we have Second Temple ossuaries that have gluskemaot, that have formulae of votive formulae, and there's one from the Kidron Valley. This is source number 9. Everything that a man benefits from this grave, God's korban from he who is inside it. Okay, that's one example. And scholars such as Moshe Benovich said, here we have found the rabbinic vow. We found on this ossuary rabbinic vow that a person consecrated in the method that we know from rabbinic literature. But we have shorter inscriptions from Arnona in Jerusalem, that each man that benefits from it is a korban. Each man is a korban. And from Mount Scopus, each man is a korban. Now, here scholars try to say, okay, this is a shortened version of a longer vow, but what I feel is that when reading these inscriptions, scholars have missed the cultural context of how vows were used. When you say each man is a korban, let us remember the first curse text we read. A person is a korban. He is dedicated to each man that benefits from it, of course. A grave violator, a potential grave violator, is a korban. He will be cursed if he violates the grave. And of course, this is a very, very common way of warding off grave demons. In Bet Sharim, for example, is full of curse texts on the graves, which of course didn't help, because all of the graves were in fact opened, and people tried to take jewelry or whatever that people were buried with. So
to use the grave.
What?
To use the grave.
To use the grave, and what?
This is a very simple reason in Jerusalem, because it's very expensive.
Yeah. Yes.
Just dig up the grave.
No, but in Bet Sharim, sometimes you have just like a hole inside the grave that it seems like a robber was it. But yes, and I wanted to also bring a grave inscription from the area of Beersheba. So we'll and that is a Greek inscription, and that reads, "Anathema from the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit will be anyone that opens the grave, because it is full." So here again we have the word anathema that we saw before in the Greek curse text, that is also literally means dedication, but in practice was used as a curse. And I also just wanted to say that the question that you asked before about the let it be permissible in the first curse text, about let it be permissible for me to drink and eat together and to come under the same roof, if we understand, I kept speaking about understanding the rabbinic text or the legal text in light of the magic text, but we could also do this the other way around. This permission to drink and eat together under the same roof, if we look at votive institutions, for example in rabbinic texts, you are not allowed to benefit from something that is consecrated to God. So if this person that is consecrated, that is dedicated to Demeter, you're not, and the person Artemis doesn't know who it is, so she says, if I benefit from this person that is supposed to be God's possession, I do not want to be wronged. So this is sort of, so that's why I don't agree that she's afraid that it's contagious. Rather, she doesn't want to sin in the sin of me'ilah, desecration, I think, whatever. But yes, she doesn't want to have that sin. So this is an example of how we could use magic and legal texts to understand the various texts, one in light of the other. So I just want to conclude and also to try in a way to tie the lectures together. This is a center for this year's theme is violence in the Abrahamic religions, right? So I want to highlight that both of our lectures had there is a certain religious theme or religious something very important in religion that is used for other means. In Rivka's presentation, it was the biblical source. The biblical source of Bil'am was used for very practical reasons to, stop the other group's team. And in this presentation, the vow, which, as I said, is usually perceived as some sort of pious religious institute, is actually used for very day-to-day violent means, and that's just. And that's why when we talk about violence in religions, it's not always how violence is used by religious people, rather also how religious institutions are used in violent ways. So, thank you.
Now we're going to unbind the magic, move to Hebrew.
Oops, I forgot.
יאללה. שאלות, מחר.
עברית?
עברית.
זה סתם היה, כאילו מה היה?
לא, יש לנו פוסט-טוקים שהם לא דוברי עברית.
והם לא פה.
רוצים להרגיש קצת, להרגיש חול לשעתיים בשבוע.
אבל הם הכינו באוויר.
זה היה...
עכשיו בכל העולם יכולים להתחלק.
למה זה כן?
לא נורא, הכל בסדר.
רוצה לעצור את הצילום או שאתה רוצה לכוונה?
לא, אפשר...
רוצה לבוא לפה? שאני לא יודעת.
אז אני רוצה להגיד